Hi, everybody. Good evening from Jakarta and good morning from those tuning in from the United States. My name is Esther. I will be your MC for today. Welcome to the sixth dialogue of the Climate Hero series. This program is brought to you by Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, the largest foreign policy group in the nation and in Southeast Asia, with the support of the United States Embassy in Indonesia, as well as the US Department of State. Each month through this program, FPCI brings a pair of climate heroes from Indonesia and the US in a virtual dialogue with the Indonesian public. These heroes are prominent figures in policy, academia, business community, government who are leading the fight against climate crisis and taking steps in transforming their community for a climate resilient future. Today, I am pleased to welcome hundreds of participants from across Indonesia in the Zoom room and also on our YouTube live streams. I was told that we have attendees not only from the nation, but also from 27 countries, including from Malaysia, Singapore, Australia, Pakistan, Myanmar, Russia, and many others. On behalf of FPCI, we would like to thank you. And we would also like to thank our university partners, our community partners, our FPCI chapters, our media partners, and everybody who have made this event successful. Before we jump into the dialogue and the event today, I would like to remind everybody of a few Zoom session rules. Please make sure to mute your audio when you're not speaking. We encourage everybody to open your camera, and please rename your sessions yourself according to the specified format, so your name and then your institutional affiliation. And we also welcome questions from the audience. You can do so by submitting it on the chat room, which will later be read by the moderator. For our participants who are joining from the YouTube, please also submit questions through the chat room. I would also like to highlight that we are providing Bahasa Indonesia interpretation. Kami menyediakan interpretasi Bahasa Indonesia dan partisipan bisa menyalakan interpretasinya di sebelah kanan layar bawah. Everybody who would like to listen to Bahasa Indonesia interpretation can do so by activating the interpretation feature on the bottom right of their screen. Without further ado, let me pass over today's event to our moderator, Pak Dino Patijalal, FPCI chairman and founder, and also the chairman of the board of WRI Indonesia. Today's topic will be on investing for the planet, ESG, and sustainable investment. So without further ado, Pak Dino, please introduce our speakers today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Esther. And hello, everybody. And thank you for joining our program, Climate Heroes, tonight. I'm very excited because, you know, since I left government 7 years ago and joined the private sector, a term that I keep hearing about is ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And apparently, you know, more and more companies, when they do business or when they decide where to invest and who to invest with, who will be their partner, ESG factor has always come into consideration, right? Maybe not for every companies, but the wave is certainly there. Yeah, it's certainly something of the present and a wave for the future, right? And I think this is of significance because when we talk about climate security in the coming years, ESG will be a big part of it, especially because one of the most critical actors in climate security is the private sector. Yeah, and you know they're the ones that have a big role in producing emissions, and they're the ones who will have a big role in helping to clean it up as well, especially in the way they spend the funding, their resources to help advance climate goals. So today we have chosen one American, Ben Harper, and one Indonesian, Anindya Bakri from Kadin, to talk to us about ESG. Yeah. Ben Harper is a managing director and head of environmental, social, and governance unit at Stone Peak. Yeah. Stone Peak is, I think, the largest, or if not one of the largest private equity firm in the United States. They handle about $30 billion of assets. Yeah. So That's is quite impressive. Right? Ben has always been involved in sustainability work. He was head of sustainability at Zurich Insurance, where because of his work, Zurich Insurance was named as an industry leader in Dow Jones Sustainability Index in 2020. So thank you, Ben, for joining us. I know it's very early in New York, 7 o'clock. Maybe you just finished a run at Central Park, right? And I'm actually envious for you to be in New York, and I hope to be visiting there soon. And the next guest is, I think, quite a famous person in Indonesia, Anindya Bakri. We were thinking about who do we get in Indonesia to speak, and the reason why we choose Anindya is because Anindya is a third generation Indonesian conglomerate. His grandfather was a successful businessman, his father too, and Anindya is the guy of the present and the future. He is now the CEO and president director of Bakri and Brothers, with a market cap of $15 billion. And the reason why we chose him, because in many conversations that I've had with Anin, he always talks about where he wants to bring the group in the future. And what is impressive is that in his vision, 70% of the group's income revenues will come from green products, electric vehicles. So I thought that is a very sharp turn of direction from where the group was, previously in previous decades. And of course, at FPCI, what we want to do is urge every big, medium, and small business people to really take a different turn, if possible, a U-turn towards a green future, a decarbonized future. So with that, let me just begin with the first question to Ben. Ben, thank you for joining us. I hope you're well and healthy. You look well and healthy.
Good morning, Dino. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here this morning.
Yes.
This evening.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. So tell me, in your experience, why is it that ESG has become such a phenomenon in the investing world, and where is this going in the future? Is this a phenomenon that is irreversible and is going to keep going stronger and stronger?
Sure, absolutely. I think we're at the point where ESG is not only super critical, but it's become a social license to operate. And you probably remember the term, and there's many acronyms in this business, CSR, or corporate social responsibility. And that seemed to have been replaced about 10 years ago. CSR was always looked as something nice to do, something nice to have in your business, whereas ESG is a bit different. I think people finally looked at it and said, hey, there's components of corporate social responsibility that are going to be necessary in order to conduct business going forward. So I think ESG, well, I know ESG is definitely here to stay, but beyond just being a social license to operate, it also provides multiple advantages. If you have a right ESG program, beyond just being the right thing to do, you gain investor confidence. We've seen that you gain in economic valuation of the asset. And it's really a much more efficient way to operate as well. So as far as whether it's here to stay, absolutely it's here to stay. And there's so many other advantages too. I mean, a proper ESG screening will help you avoid stranded assets in the future. You can look at some of the fossil fuel industries, and there's some great examples there. But ESG has just become not only a standard in the way we do business, but also requiring a level of transparency to show that you're actually doing the right thing. And I really think that's going to continue and only progress. And you're starting to see it being pulled into the regulatory fold as well. So for multiple reasons, ESG is accelerating at a rate that I haven't seen in my experience. And I think it's going to continue to really dominate some of the decisions going forward. Not only in this asset class, but really in almost all future investments.
Yeah, I'll Google ESG um, uh, amount worldwide, and the number that I saw on Google was like $53 trillion of ESG investment out there around the world. Does that sound right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a large number, but it doesn't surprise me whatsoever. I can see it easily being 53 trillion, and I think almost any significant investments going forward, you're going to see a component of ESG tagged within that. So that doesn't surprise me at all. And that's the thing too, is with ESG, particularly the E portion, as we enter this era of decarbonization, the environmental aspect alone is going to present so much opportunity. I forget what the exact number is to really transform our current society to a low carbon economy, but that's a really, really big number. So you got to remember that ESG is also presenting some great opportunities in the investment space as well.
Yeah. Pak Anin, how did your company embrace sustainability standard? And also I want to add, do you think that ESG has caught on among Indonesian conglomerates out there?
Yeah, thank you, Pak Dino, Ambassador Dino. And thanks, Ben. I like the word social license to operate, because I do believe the same thing. Because we as entrepreneurs, especially we are 80-year-old group, we believe in longevity, sustainability going forward. And the only way for you to be sustainable is to make sure that you live well together with a lot of people in good environment, and make sure that you contribute in this climate change initiative, right? Now, I mean, I went to COP26 just a couple of months back. Of course, the result is not fully satisfactory, but at the same time, it remains hopeful for all of us that we put a break on the slippery slope, so to speak. Yeah. But to us, as an 80-year-old group, it all makes sense because one, as a group, we contribute a lot of our earnings from fossil fuel energy. But number two, in the last 20 years, as I've been in the business, I'm bringing the industrialization back again, as well as digitalization, as I started my career in the telco, media, and technology. So I believe the next disruption, that is actually for good reason, is this space of energy transition. Yeah. And I believe, Pak Dino, Indonesia can play a lot of role. People talk about the tropical forest that we have, but the peatland and mangroves are even more, exciting when it comes to contribution to the world. So, I believe, as I'm very much involved in Kadin, a lot of big companies, small, medium enterprises are trying to see what they can do to contribute a little bit more than before to this climate change initiative. And to a certain extent, this blue sky effect after the COVID in the last 2 years really helped to accelerate a lot of the demand from the public, and also the commitment from the public servants. Plus, we'll talk a little bit later on about this G20 presidency of Indonesia, which basically put climate change as one of the three agenda, along with digitalization and global health. So yes, Pak Dino, I think this net zero initiative in Kadin, we have our own desk to help a lot of companies to get there or learn about it. But yeah, I think it is irreversible, and I think it's going to create a lot of economic growth. But this time it's going to be much more inclusive, I think.
Yes. I want to ask you a question, and I want Ben to follow up with his comment after. Pak Anin, how do you convince Indonesian companies that they can no longer just be proud about the resources that our country have, and that, look, anybody who invests here, they're going to make money, and so that's why we don't really need to do anything, because we are resource-rich country, right? And by saying that, they're forgetting that investors out there have a different measurement now, which is ESG. right? And I think now we're not there yet. Many Indonesian companies do not realize that unless they meet ESG, criterias, they're not going to get strong investments coming in, right? So how do we make them understand that? And Ben, tell me if that's how you measure or how you judge where your funds go to abroad. Yeah. Please, Anin.
Thank you, Pak Dino. I think more and more companies really realize that this one is for real. Because one, the resources that we can talk highly about is finite, right? Now we talk about, for example, this electrification agenda with nickel, for example. We have about 21 million tons of nickel in Indonesia. It is the largest in the world. But with the direction of the battery needs, I'm sure in 10 years, it's going to be scarce for Indonesia and the world, right? So we cannot just rely on natural resources alone. New and renewable energy is a must, right? And Indonesia is my personal opinion. We have to believe in value addition in everything we do, right? Now, when we talk about this energy transition, we gotta really work hard in it because there are challenges, right? Challenges, for example, when we talk about renewable energy such as solar energy or any energy for that matter, price is an issue. Also, scalability is an issue. Sometimes the ability for continuous power in a region is a challenge. But there are a lot of technology that actually are enabling that for that major shift. Let me just give you a quick anecdote on why we focus on electrifying public transportation in Indonesia, starting Jakarta. Look, transportation, more than 20% of the carbon emission in the world. And in Indonesia, with the public transportation being, the biggest, it can be, the buses, right? One day, one late, a staff of mine came in. She came in apologetic and all that. Her scarf was, smell like, fume, right? So I asked her, hey, what happened? No, sir, it's just the bus is stinky, and at the same time, it gets me late. So it keeps, it keeps you thinking that, hey, maybe, public transportation is the first one to move the needle if you can do that, right? So we're happy to let you know that we worked really hard in the last 4 years, and next Friday, the first 30 buses in Jakarta is going to be on the road. And we worked 4 years just to convince them that, yes, the economics make sense. We need to work with somebody like Ben to make sure that the financing makes sense. But, for the first one, we thought that somebody has to be the pioneer. And this 30 is nothing. Even in Jakarta, you have all the way up to 8,000 buses regulated, and the whole Indonesia is 230,000. But unless somebody is willing to go through the whole homologation, educating the stakeholders, including the government, including pushing for presidential decree, nothing like this is going to happen. And last thing I'm going to say, for example, like this solar energy. We have 17,000 islands in Indonesia, Pak Dino, right? And especially on the eastern part of the country, you have about 5,000 diesel power plants. So de-dieselization of the eastern part of the country is very important. So what we are working really hard is to make sure that solar energy can become, the solution to do that. And to do it, you cannot just focus on, the technology, but you got to focus on the price. Therefore, this government push to do de-dieselization on the eastern part of the country, I think is one of the solution and quick fix, if I may say. Yeah.
Ben, does the world of investing opportunities decrease with ESG because you have less and less doors opening that qualify for ESG compliance, or is it boundless? Yeah.
Well, I think we're actually seeing a lot more opportunities. I mean, we're really experiencing a fundamental shift as Anindya's made a few really key points. We're entering the era of technology, and we also understand, as he pointed out so well, that resources are finite. So there's so many opportunities in technology. So ESG is really driving some potential new investments as well. And if we step back and think about the definition of sustainability, it's doing things today in a way that safeguards our ability to do it tomorrow. And I think some of the pieces that Anindya brought up about digitalization and electrification are key to this. And with those, that creates new market opportunity. And also, I think what's most exciting now is we're starting to see those opportunities at a really scalable way. And one more point to that too is when you start looking at all the stakeholders, what can we do? Are you going to be able to satisfy all stakeholders with whatever momentum we're taking forward in this shift to a low carbon society? And I think that's a real challenge. So I do think, we continue to see some new opportunities in some of the technology plays, clearly in the renewable energy space, but we need to make certain too that we still recognize that there's some areas that are going to be very difficult. The S part of ESG is still very critical. I mean, people deserve access to reasonably priced power, energy, and heat, and so we need to understand that this is while we continue to see some of these great opportunities, we just can't let part of the vulnerable population be left behind in order just to pursue, some of the modernizations for sure.
Is critical is because I think we are too focused on the $100 billion climate finance. And there's been a great debate in the multilateral forum that how come the developed countries are not providing that $100 billion to the max, yeah? And the reality is that we need a lot more than $100 billion, right? The UN stated, in fact, it's $1 trillion project, and even that's a low call, yeah? I think it's a lot more than $1 trillion, right? So do you agree that private sector really is the key to climate finance, especially for countries that need it, and for that to happen, do you see many companies now have this climate consciousness? Because otherwise, if you don't care about climate future, it's hard for you to do ESG, I guess, right?
Sure. Yeah. You know what? I think it's a multi-trillion-dollar question. The numbers you continue to see, I think that's just a drop in the bucket right now. But I think it's a combination of the private markets and the public sector as well. I think it's going to take a partnership, and I think where some of the partnerships come in are things like mitigation technologies, where government regulation or public regulation can help drive some of the innovations we need. For instance, carbon capture and sequestration is a great technology. It's well proven. It's very expensive to deploy. And I think that's an area where when you get a public-private partnership, you could really, really drive some change. And with that, it also drives economic growth. And so while I think that absolutely it's going to take private dollars as well, you're going to have some partnership with public and government as well if we really want to do things at scale. And I'm not just saying regulatory wise, saying there's a carrot and a stick approach, and you can always say you must do this, but I think the better way is to help try to drive economic growth and create incentives, reasonable incentives that will help spur innovation and help drive some of the investments that are needed that prior may not have made sense, but now because of certain incentivizations, absolutely makes sense to move forward for more than just the ESG perspective, but because it also makes pure economic sense as well. And I'll give you an example, and this is an example in the U.S., but I think you could take the example and apply it elsewhere. Carbon capture and sequestration is a technology. It's not an inexpensive technology, but now that there's discussions around providing tax rebates of almost $100 a ton, between $50 and $100 a ton, it becomes something of economic value, and that's starting to drive some of that innovation. And I think we're going to see that in other sectors too, particularly in energy storage and transportation. I think is going to be a big one, and some of the other places. So I really think that it's going to require definitely private investment, but it's going to require private investment with a really solid fundamental, public backing as well.
Yeah. Let me turn to Pa Anin. Pa Anin, you're the third generation of family business. You had a conglomerate now, and I'm just wondering when you decided for the company future to be 70% consisting of green products in the form of electric cars, electric buses and trucks. Yeah. What was the reaction of the older family members, and even the shareholders and the whole corporate family? Was there any resistance? Did they say you're crazy, you're out of your mind, and so on? Right. So what was the response?
Yeah. Sure. I think all of that is one of the least they talk to somebody who would propose that, right? But let me explain you a little bit, because in the last 80 years we have always been in the industrialization with whatever it is, steel pipe, auto parts, or digitalization with the media and technology, and then with energy, as I mentioned, whether that's oil and gas or other fossil fuel. So my argument is that, look, all of those three things really converge in this electrification, among others, right? You have all of them really, and Indonesia has the resources for now to develop it to become actually one of the superpowers in this electrification initiatives, right? So, now is a question of not whether we should participate or not. It's just a question of how, right? And that's why I was mentioning to you, it's almost by accident. At one point in time, about 3-4 years ago, when I was doing a little jogging in Stanford Business School, alma mater, to see a friend, almost got hit by a bus with no sound, right? And the brand is BYD. Of course, I thought it was a American brand. It happens to be a Chinese brand invested by a famous American investor. But my point is, look, it is a way for us to revisit our old industry, but doing it in much more sustainable manner, using the resources that Indonesia has, but process it in a way that in the future, we can not only serve Indonesians, but also serve the region, if not the world. And just to add to that point, but we also believe really in a group that international partnership is the key, because we live in the same world, so it makes all the sense, right? So in addition to serving, Indonesian market with, for example, a Chinese partner, we also work very closely with a gigafactory in the UK, because we believe that's one way to support the UK, but we ourselves bring in the industrialization in the form of cathode, for example, processed nickel, so not just pure nickel. So that way, Indonesia can also contribute to UK and hopefully Europe, right? And that's just a way for us to do it. So I think, yes, in the beginning, people think that, we are shooting the moon or what have you. But more and more, it makes sense. And lastly, I want to say, for example, like when we talk about the solar energy de-dieselization in the eastern part, right? Right now, the total gasoline import for the country for that diesel, 5,000 power plants is equal to $1 billion, right? That is an additional reason why we should do it, right? Renewable, better foreign reserve, and so on and so forth. So, whether you look at the macroeconomic level, I think it makes all the sense, and also is really exciting for entrepreneur like us, right? When else can you have a disruption, really, like the digital disruption? But this one you have serious scale to make a difference. And lastly, I guess in the COP26, a bunch of next generation leaders of Indonesia put together the first ever Indonesian Impact Fund, which we launched in COP26 with the hope in presidency this year in G20 or B20 for that matter. We want to include foreign investors, and also not only investors, but the right metrics, the right board of directors, because in this kind of thing, I think administration and governance is the key. Sorry for talking too long.
Yeah, well, I want to ask you, and this is also for Ben. The DNA of Indonesia's national pride for my grandfather was freedom, right? Because we were colonized and so on. And then that DNA was added a new dimension, which is development, right? So development became the mantra of everything. And for my generation, the DNA of our national pride was democracy. Yeah, we discovered democracy in 1998, right? So I'm just wondering if you think the DNA of our kids, right? We're about the same age, right? The DNA of our kids will be net zero, will be a climate. I ask this because every time I have dinner, my kids torture me. Like, Dad, what are you doing to save the world from climate hell? Blah blah blah. Right? So I wonder, do you kids pressure you the same? And also Ben, the same question. Yeah, but Pak Anin, is that what's happening to your kids as well?
Well, you can imagine. If you look at the majority of our businesses in fossil fuel, you can imagine all these kids growing up. One is 19 going to be 20-year-old aspired economists, and then the other two are in boarding school with international exposure. Sure, they have that kind of aspiration because they believe that why would you have a technology in the world if you cannot really make the environment better? It doesn't really make sense for them, right? In a little thing you do, whether you use tumbler, you use your chopsticks, you bring it, all those little things become relevant, however we put together a business model. Because now transparency is the name of the game, and nothing that you cannot see whether you are, honest or sincere, right? So yes, pressure for the next generation is there, and as you know, but and certainly Ben, 2/3 of Indonesia are millennials, and also generation 10 years younger than millennials, right? So these people not only matter economically, right, but politically it matters, right? And for example, in 2024, we should have an election and so on. So I think this is a seismic change politically, economically, and but the beauty of it is that they are all proud, right? They're all proud that they can contribute to the world in a little way, and with 275 million people, you can do quite a global proportion, I guess.
Yeah, Ben, who's your real boss, the funders or the kids?
Well, they're soon going to be one and the same, that's for sure. And to your point, it's refreshing to see what this next generation is really demanding of us, because they do look at it and say, you know what, we live on one planet, we've got finite resources. We see changes happening, and a lot of the negative changes are occurring in some of the with some of the world's most vulnerable populations. So we absolutely see, and I see it. I've got two college-age kids, and they'll remind me all the time about trying to do the right thing in every aspect that they can. But these days, just getting to attract top talent. If you want to attract top talent, you better have a substantial ESG position at your company. You better be publishing a transparent sustainability report each year. Those are the questions that we're getting from some of the university graduates, particularly the ones that are some of the top young minds that we're seeing. It's front and center. They only want to work for a company that's got a correct social conscience, as well as a plan of action to make certain that they're doing something instead of just talking about it. So I think it's incredibly refreshing to see this, and we see it all the time. And you're going to continue to see it more, particularly as climate and sustainability and socially conscious driven classes are driven more into the academic agenda. If they weren't aware of it before, they're specifically taking classes on what they can do to make sure that whatever they do in their next step of their career, they're helping to be part of the solution. And we really welcome that for sure.
Okay. Thank you. Before I take questions, please write up your questions in the chat group. I want to ask Ben. You mentioned PPP. Yeah, would be one of the ways by which private sector can work with the government through public-private partnerships. But in Indonesia, from my experience, I think Anin knows this quite well. Also, PPP have a hard time taking place. I don't know what it is. When I was in government also, that's one of the hardest things to do, finding the right term, the right formula, the right way of cooperation. From your experience, what is the best way to get PPP, public-private partnership, to be off the ground? And why is it so difficult in some countries, including in Indonesia, for this to take?
You know what? I don't think it's easy anywhere. It really isn't. But I think what we need to do is there needs to be a recognition of roles. And when looking at public-private partnerships, there's always the contractual restrictions that come with it. But when I say we need to look at roles, we need to understand the interconnected nature of climate change in some of these systems. And climate change in itself is a risk. We're seeing large weather pattern shifts, which can cause drought, that creates migration of people, which creates overcrowding, and then you have stress systems. On the asset level, when we look at interconnected nature of things, we look at things like it's Stone Peak here. We're an infrastructure investor, and things are a system, so we can address something individually. We can, we can look at an asset class or an individual asset and try to bill it to the best of our abilities, but it's still being supported by certain public systems. And I'll give you an example. Years ago, a company I was working for had invested in a wastewater treatment plant in the Gulf Coast, and they built it to the most resilient standards they can, which, by the way, I really think we're going to start seeing ESG plus R, with the R for resilience, in a much broader sense here in the very near future. But they built this asset to the highest standard that they possibly could. It was elevated up 3.5 feet. It had some additional flood protection measures. And after one of the devastating hurricanes hit the Gulf Coast, it was operable within 24 hours with some very, very minor repairs. That's great, but the roadways getting to the facility were totally wiped out, so you didn't have the ability to operate the facility because people simply couldn't get to work. And that's just an example of the interconnected nature of some of these risks. And so when we look at public-private partnerships, I think there's a few different ways of looking at it. You can look at it as a pure economic play, and with some of the more traditional things like highways and bridges and stuff like that. But then there's also the partnership of working with entities to provide security around some of the interconnected natures of it. So if we're building an asset, making certain that the roadway is still going to be there in case of an extreme weather event, making sure that electricity is still going to be available, making sure that water is still going to be available. And I think that's all important. And so I think the first step is really trying to identify those connected systems and making sure that everybody really knows which role somebody should play in a P3 or similar type project.
Dino, it seems you're still muted.
Now, okay. So I'm going to take some questions now. two questions. One from Dedi Palamia to Pa Anindya. The question is, does driving ESG agenda in Bakri Group mean sacrificing your group returns? And the second question from Jane Glory from Cambridge. The question is to Pa Ben. COP26 came up with Glasgow Financial Net Zero Alliance, which represents 130 trillions of assets worldwide, but less than 10% of their portfolio is invested in developing countries, which is most vulnerable to climate change. How do we mobilize the rest of these assets to support developing countries' decarbonization projects? Pa Anin first, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Padino, for the question from the audience. I don't think it will sacrifice return. You just have to think about it a little bit longer, not so much, maybe between 5 to 10 years. If you look at the time zone, 5 to 10 years, I think you're going to get even better return, because essentially it is the beauty of it. It is a disruption that has technology in it, industrialization in it, and also something that has a lot to do with lifestyle. So yes, in the beginning, you have to invest in it, and I urge the investment to focus on deep-seated belief that industrialization to scale it going forward. So there is no going back on this, right? If you believe in that and you execute well, I think the return definitely will come. And like what Ben says, if you are doing it right, with the right transparency, governance, the market will reward it, right? The market will reward, whether that's from your multiples or cost of financing. I'm not quite sure what the numbers these days, but the last time I went to London Stock Exchange about 3-4 months ago, they are saying that every month at least about 10 billion pounds being raised, if not more, in green bonds, sustainable bonds, or climate change bonds. So just as an example. So, one, I think the return is there. Number two, you just have to invest for long term and not doing it halfway. And the third thing, I think the investor will reward it. And we spoke a little bit about the people, the citizens of the world, or Indonesia for that matter, really appreciate it as the younger generation really look for this type of companies that produce the right products for them.
Okay. Ben, how do we make sure that the rest of the money also go to developing countries?
Well, that's definitely a very large question, and I think it's one that's unfortunately hasn't been answered great at this time. As you mentioned, there's 130 trillion, I think, that is available for investment, and only less than 10% is going to some of these areas where it's most needed. And again, it's difficult because these are a lot of the areas that are most vulnerable to climate change as well. But I think in order to spur development in some of these areas, that's where it is going to take some government intervention in providing some of the incentivizations that I talked about earlier. The other thing too is you need to recognize some of the regional strengths, and you need to play to some of those strengths. So I look at Indonesia and really much of Asia. They're really primed to be a future energy powerhouse. You look at just the geography of it and the ability to develop solar and wind projects, wave technology, things like that. And so I think if you really want to mobilize some of those funds to to certain areas, you really need to look at what some of the regional strengths are and try to play on those strengths. And definitely when we look at Asia Pac, we really look at it through a lens of they're going to be a renewable energy leader. If they're leading right now, but definitely in years to come, they're truly going to become an energy powerhouse.
Yeah. Well, I want to follow up with that, Ben. Do you think non-Western governments, developing countries, should pay more attention, more effort on attracting ESG private capital rather than keep demanding from developed countries to deliver the $100 billion, which hasn't come in so many years, right?
Yeah.
So do you think that there should be louder on other fronts, which is the ESG capital?
Yeah, I don't think there's any one silver bullet, but I think absolutely, if things are more attractive, you make things more attractive to private investment, be it through tax incentivization, be it through having a prepared and enhanced workforce, other factors, ESG factors, then I think absolutely that will attract the investments needed. Will it ever supplant the needs for other support from the West and elsewhere, or from some of the development banks? I don't know. Maybe not in the beginning, but I think what you just need to do is get some traction from the private markets. And once you get some traction, I think you'll see that more will follow for certain. But I do think that it's going to take both entities to really try to make a change, make a fundamental change, so that going forward, the private capital flows more freely.
Okay, there are two questions. One from Jess Yogaratnam, and I imagine this is from Pa Anin, and the other one is from Margot de Groot. From Jess Yogaratnam to Pa Anin, Global Buildings Performance Network. Oh, he's from Global Business Performance Network of Monash University in Australia. He asks, EV provides an opportunity for decarbonization to build environment to support EV charging facilities. Will the EV introduction lead to infrastructure development to decarbonize public transport buildings, for example, bus stations? Yeah. So are we sufficient in that front? Yeah. And Margot de Groot asks Ben, The Economist has recently published an article casting a dark shadow on the positive image of green investment, or so-called green investors' filthy secret, highlighting the fact that the fundamental high return of investment mentality was still very much there. How do we drive a truly transformative approach to investment? Panin?
Yeah, thank you, Padino. And later on, if I have time, I would love to just touch a little bit on the possibility of working together during G20 with the international financial community. But anyway, on this EV, I think so, Padino, and for the person who asked about the EV, because look, let's think about it a little bit, right? So in Jakarta alone, not many people, that Transjakarta has 7,000 buses. It is probably bigger than some of the bus transportation company in Europe, right? In fact, it is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, in Southeast Asia. Now, if they can electrify the whole 7,000, not only they will help, the carbon emission in the city, which Jakarta is taking a lead, but it will help to build the infrastructure such as the charging station, recycle, which is very important because we think that in 10 years, nickel will be probably no longer as accessible. So recycling is very important. But also remember, after the bus or in public transportation disruption, the next thing will be motorcycle. Motorcycle is totally a whole new ball game because motorcycle in Indonesia is actually the biggest in the world, right? So a lot of the carbon emission outside Jakarta is actually coming from motorcycles, right? Nobody's gonna, adopt the electricity in motorcycle without the PLN of the world or Pertamina of the world, produce the infrastructure development. But let's also think about not only the hardware infrastructure, but the software infrastructure is going to come in as well. And we know that in Indonesia, a lot of not only unicorns, decacorn or multi-decacorns are coming because the ability to localize software. I think with the IT, AI, and data analytics, a lot of software companies that will enable this so-called the soft infrastructure in EV as well. So I'm very optimistic and hopeful, of course. The first 1% of the electric population of the vehicles will probably take about 4 years. But I think every 1 year after that, you may have not 1%, but maybe 3-4% each year. That has happened in a lot of other places. So the key is to make sure that you are preparing all the groundwork for that 3-4 years, so that when the market finally takes off, you can also grow with the market. And plus, I have to also applaud the government, from the president, the current government, and also the parliament, really work hard to provide the regulatory framework to make sure that it is not only from the supply side will be very attractive to invest and so on, but also from the demand side, right? A lot of incentives are being given, and we think it should be more. But yes, I do believe this ecosystem is going to finally be completed, but you just have to take one step at a time and be patient and be a believer, because in Indonesia it's not unique. It happens in any other place in the world. Sure, it will be happening also in the 4th largest country in the world. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Anin. And by the way, I know the government has a target of 600,000 EV, but I want to say, as a citizen, as a goodwill citizen, 600,000 EV for a country of 300 million is still way too low. Yeah, way too low. I think they need to be more ambitious, even though they don't reach the target, but they gotta set a higher target. Yeah, but that's me talking as the what do you call it? My boss is my children. I'm talking on their behalf. Ben, how do you respond to Margaret de Groo?
Sure. So I haven't had a chance to read the article in The Economist, but I've definitely got something I can Google then after this presentation. But I think to truly transform the approach, it's all about transparency, and that comes in with the G part of ESG and the governance. And not only the transparency, but there's also needs to be some kind of standardization around some of the reporting metrics. And I understand that not all two investments are alike. So the level of standardization, there's got to be there's got to be some flexibility in it. But when we start looking at different KPIs, different performance metrics, we need to be able to really measure apples to apples. And I think at COP26, they really put together something interesting with the International Standards Sustainability Board, or International Sustainability Standards Board. And I think that will help add a level of transparency and some standardization across some of the reporting metrics, so that it will help to avoid what's being called as greenwashing. So I think that's going to really drive and really separate the companies going forward as to who's going to be a trusted partner on this development path going forward and who's not. And I think that's the best way to do it, is demand for transparency and standardization of measurements and metrics.
Yeah, okay. Well, Pak Anin, I want to give you an opportunity to speak about B20. I know you're very active as a leader of B20 in connection with G20. But also, in addition, I want to ask this question. In Indonesia, we have this term, anget-anget tai ayam, right? Which means, hot and cold. We're hot one year when we do something, but the following year, we do something else, right? It's cyclical, right? Inconsistent. And there's so many things we do in our country that is anget-anget tai ayam, right? So how do we make sure that this, decarbonized green future is really real and sustainable, and it's not anget-anget tai ayam? And please talk about B20.
Yeah. Ben, what Pak Dino is saying is basically warm chicken shit. That's what it means. Meaning in Indonesian term, right? That's anget-anget tai ayam. This time, I think it's for real and no coming back, right? Because this blue sky scenario, and then our kids are talking about the same thing, and then quite pushy and demanding, but also just one, data. So, but 7 years ago, Indonesia export zero stainless steel, right? Just an evidence that things are different. Now we're exporting $20 billion of export just this year alone, meaning in 2021, and that is only coming from one nickel, right? You become from zero, you process it, you become $20 billion, and that's about third largest contributor to surplus of trade, right? not only whatever coal, palm oil, but this one, right? Now you can imagine if this thing go on and on for not only nickel, bauxite, tin, and what have you, right? So I think people really believe that this one is economically making sense, but at the same time, environmentally, socially, if you do it right, you'll be rewarded. And plus, when you go home and have dinner at night, you're still going to be looking like a real person, right? But coming to G20, B20, a lot of people, ask why this is relevant for the ESG or the climate change. Now, one, because this is the forum for 80% of the economy, but also 80% of the polluters, right? These are the guys, these 20 people, right? So whatever we say, we got to make sure that the leaders actually solve this climate energy transition, right? Because I think after the COVID, climate is important, and also the thing I want to address is the capital, right? Now, I think Ben, also for you, please kindly take a look at this because in B20, this is one of the things that we really want to address. We want to make sure that we develop credible plans for the transitioning to low carbon, climate resilient future, because it has different way of governing, administrating this type of financing. But it is definitely needed. Just for example, if we can find a financing for public transportation, not for us, but for the operators, long-term, low cost of capital, the amount of adoption will be much, much bigger and much, much faster because of the cost of ownership, for example. So please take a look at it from the B20 point of view, because this is one of the focus. And the second thing I mentioned quickly, that in COP26, we launched this Indonesia Impact Fund, right? We want to quote unquote go global in the GS20. So we would love to, have a lot of international investors to take part in it, and kind of like reach net zero and kind of address SDG at the same time. And lastly, this Article 6, in the COP26 is probably one of the few great breakthroughs from COP26, which is about carbon market. So we are new as a country, but we are talking to a lot of people, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. All we know, we have the quote unquote goods, the possibility to absorb carbon, but we need also how to make the market, and that's what we need a lot of inputs from international community, whether exchange like NASDAQ, London Stock Exchange, and whatnot. So those three things are something that is very close to our heart, because otherwise, like we said, $100 billion a year, first it has to come, but number two, it's not going to be enough. And just like anything else, I think the private sector and public sector have to play part there. Thank you, Pak Dino. Just sharing some thoughts here.
Thank you. And now, in closing, I want to bring both of you to something totally out of this ESG project. And if you don't want to answer, that's totally fine. But I just noticed that we have participants from Ukraine and Russia in this Zoom talk. And hello, friends from Ukraine and Russia. So my question to Ben and Anindya, first, Ben, you handle your private equity firm handle almost $40 billion. You're the largest private equity fund in the U.S. How do you see this conflict in Ukraine affecting your investment landscape around the world? And Anin, you don't need to answer this if you don't want to, but G20 in November, 15, 16 November in Bali, Putin's going to be there. Biden's going to be there. Macron is going to be there. Boris Johnson, Olaf Scholz is going to be there. A lot of European leaders will be there. But do you think what happens now in Ukraine will totally ruin the spirit in G20 in Bali, even though this is like 9 months away? Yeah? So, Ben, how does it affect? I'm sorry, this is not ESG, but if you don't want to answer,
Sure.
it's fine.
No, absolutely. And first and foremost, we're just, I think like everybody, we're all hoping that there's a peaceful resolution soon, and that's most important. Is the health and welfare of the people. But I think when it comes to an impact, and this is nothing new, it's all about energy security. And in particular, natural gas has come to the forefront in not only Europe, but at global supply and global pricing. And that's going to have a pretty big effect going forward. And so I think too, there's going to be some positives that'll start to emerge, and that people will realize that there does need to be that there's one thing to have a steady supply of energy. There's another to have a self-sufficient, have enough self-sufficient energy generation that there's not reliance on one single entity. So I think if there's any difference that's going to come out from an investment perspective, it's really going to focus around self-security of energy for sure.
And then,
but very tough question. But I think as an Indonesian, you have to give at least a little bit of thought on this, right? Well, first on the human side, of course, it's heartbreaking to see what's happening out there, right? Any war is never justifiable, I think, for all of us who have thankfully received independence and liberty in general, right? But number two, I agree with Ben. Energy security is key, and the best way to do it is to start building a capability for the energy transition to renewable and new energy. It's not easy. Not every country has the potential to do it, but I think it has to be central part of every high-level discussions, along with water and food, of course. So I think G20 in Indonesia, in Bali, we can only hope, that the mood will change a little bit. Hopefully, it gets better as we get closer. But who knows? Bali has special spirit. They call it Island of the Gods, right? So hopefully, maybe one of the accomplishments that Bali can offer is the peace treaty, right? We can talk day in, day out about digitalization, energy transition, global health, but at the end of the day, if there is no peace, all of them really is secondary. So I'm hopeful that really Bali can actually put this beginning of the year dynamics, let's put it that way, to bed, and we start hopefully 2023 better. Well, okay. There is no guarantee, of course.
Yeah, well, thank you. I want to share this story before we close. When Indonesia hosted APEC in Bali, all the leaders conspired regarding President Putin, right? What I mean by this, I'm not divulging a state secret. It was Putin's birthday, right? And one day of APEC, and we all conspired. I'm talking about the leaders of the West and the East and North and South, conspired to pretend as if there's going to be an important meeting. And we told President Putin to come, and he came. We made sure that he came the last. And he thought he was addressing an important, some emergency session of the leaders of G20. And when he came into the room, there was a big, surprise, and everybody starts singing, happy birthday to you. And then, the president at the time gave him a guitar. And the whole session was not about negotiation. The whole session was just about singing a happy birthday song. So there was that spirit of congeniality during that APEC meeting in Bali, attended by the a number of world leaders. But unfortunately, I think that mood is not going to be the same this year. We hope that there will be peace. There will be a political solution. But I do think that the relationship between Russia and the West, and the relationship between China and the West, and the relationship between Russia and China have changed. Not just for the short term, but I think maybe for the medium term, if not for the long term. So I think Indonesia will need to navigate with great diplomatic skill to ensure that G20 will not be burdened by all that. Although I think that's wishful thinking, but to minimize whatever geopolitical stress will impose on the G20. And with that, I want to say thank you to Ben and Anin. I know Ben, Stonepeak is starting to look and invest in Indonesia. So thank you for that. You're very much welcome. Come to Indonesia, come to Bali. I'll take you to a restaurant Padang. The best food, ethnic food in the country, right? We'll have a good satay with Anin also. And for everybody that joined us, I want to say thank you, and especially for our friends from Russia and Ukraine. We pray and hope for peace in Ukraine. All of us are counting on it. Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Climate Heroes edition, and I hope you enjoyed our discussions. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Panin. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Pak Dino, Pak Ben. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Tambayong.
Saya Krisdayanti.
Saya Kalista Iskandar.
Saya Reza Radian.
Saya Chico Jericho.
Saya Chelsea Islan.
Saya Cinta Laura Kiel.
Saya Dian Sastrowardoyo.
Saya Wulan Guritno.
Saya Julia Stel.
Saya Yoshi Sudarso.
Saya sangat semangat menyongsong Indonesia Emas
100 tahunnya merdeka pada tahun
2045 nanti.
Kita semua di Indonesia bermimpi dan menginginkan agar bisa mencapai tujuan Indonesia Emas di tahun 2045.
Sungguh suatu capaian sejarah yang indah
dan luar biasa dalam perjalanan bangsa kita.
Nggak kebayang betapa hebatnya Indonesia Emas nanti.
Insya Allah pada tahun 2045 saya akan mulai mewariskan Indonesia kepada putra-putri saya.
Di usia NKRI yang 100 tahun nanti,
saya ingin kita semua hidup dalam Indonesia yang Pancasilais,
yang modern,
maju,
makmur,
sejahtera,
hijau, adil, aman,
bebas korupsi,
demokratis, dan tentunya bersatu.
Tujuan tersebut bukan tanpa tantangan.
Ancaman terbesar di tahun 2045 bukanlah pandemi.
Bukan lagi kemiskinan atau kebodohan.
Bukan separatisme.
Bukan perang nuklir.
Bukan invasi militer dari luar.
Ancaman terbesar bangsa Indonesia
di tahun 2045 nanti,
the mother of all problems adalah
pemanasan global,
di mana suhu bumi rata-rata akan naik
3-4 derajat Celcius.
Itu adalah suhu terpanas sepanjang sejarah manusia. Suhu terpanas di bumi kita yang sudah berusia 4,5 miliar tahun.
Suhu tinggi akan membuat planet bumi sakit parah.
Saya tidak mau melihat Indonesia Emas dan anak-anak kita nanti
hidup sengsara dalam bumi yang panas ini.
Dengan perubahan cuaca yang ekstrim di mana-mana.
Polusi merajalela dan membunuh puluhan juta orang.
Hujan deras dan banjir di mana-mana.
Gunung es di Antartika terus mencair.
Air laut akan naik setinggi 1 meter.
Sumber air dunia akan berkurang dengan sangat drastis.
Banyak pulau yang akan tenggelam.
Semakin banyak spesies punah yang disebut the sixth extinction.
Keragaman hayati akan rusak, suhu air laut yang naik, ekosistem laut yang terancam, serta terumbu karang yang banyak mati.
Penyakit semakin banyak menyebar, termasuk malaria.
Stok pangan menurun banyak dan kekeringan di mana-mana.
Banyak tanah yang akan menjadi padang pasir tandus.
Dan konflik berbasis lingkungan yang meningkat juga secara drastis.
Semua ini akibat ulah manusia.
Namun, malapetaka ini dapat juga dicegah oleh manusia.
Karena itulah, ayo kita selamatkan Indonesia dari bumi panas.
Mari kita mulai mengurangi emisi gas rumah kaca Indonesia.
Ayo kita kurangi emisi gas rumah kaca 50% di tahun 2030.
Dan kita kurangi terus sampai akhirnya kita bisa mencapai 0 emisi di tahun 2050.
Ayo hijaukan ekonomi kita, jaga hutan kita.
Jaga ekosistem laut kita.
Kembangkan energi bersih dan kurangi segala emisi karbon dalam kehidupan kita.
Sehingga Indonesia Emas 2045 akan hidup dalam bumi yang nyaman, sehat, dan bahagia.
Sehingga Indonesia dapat menjadi bagian penting dalam solusi global perubahan iklim.
Planet bumi harus kita sembuhkan dari sekarang.
Target besar dan mulia ini bisa kita capai.
Ayo kita bergotong royong.
Selamatkan planet bumi. Selamatkan umat manusia.
Selamatkan generasi kita dan generasi seterusnya.
Kita sambut Indonesia Emas yang penuh harapan.
Selamatkan Indonesia
2045.
Sadarkah Anda, kita mungkin adalah generasi terakhir yang bisa hidup dalam dunia bercuaca normal. Kita juga adalah satu-satunya generasi yang bisa menyelamatkan umat manusia dari bahaya bumi mendidih yang menanti kita selamanya di depan. Ayo kita penuhi panggilan planet bumi, panggilan umat manusia, dan panggilan sejarah. Ayo sebarkan pesan ini dan tanda tangani petisi.